Welcome everybody to our continuing BBISS seminar series, and we're pleased to have Professor Marilyn Brown as our speaker today. Marilyn is a Regents and Brook Byers Professor of Sustainable Systems in the School of Public Policy. Marilyn joined Georgia Tech in 2006 after a distinguished career in the U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Lab. She has a PhD from Ohio State, Master's in Regional Planning from the University of Massachusetts, and a DA in Political Science from Rutgers University. In 2020, she is elected a member of both the National Academy of Engineering and National Academy of Sciences. She served in many organizations, or provided service to many organizations. I won't list them all, but she was a co-founder of the Southeast Energy Efficiency Alliance, and I know that she served for quite a while on the very important and influential board of directors of the Tennessee Valley Authority, TDA. Her research focuses on the design and impact of policies aimed at accelerating the development and deployment of sustainable energy technologies, with an emphasis on the electric utility industry, the integration of energy efficiency, demand response, with solar resources, and ways of improving resiliency to disruptions. So with that, I'll let Marilyn take it away.
All right, so I'm going to talk about a research program and its findings that we've been engaged in for a couple of years now, looking at household behavior and the adoption of climate technologies, focusing in particular on the state of Georgia, with funding from the Racy Anderson Foundation, the Brook Byers Institute, and the University of Georgia. So, how willing are households to electrify their homes? First, let's start by noting that the clean energy transition is underway. A lot of progress has been made, and you see the goals, the science-based goals on the left, and the response where we are approximately to date. And you can see that there is a need to accelerate. So one of the most promising approaches to get further faster is through low carbon electrification of larger portions of our economy. This is sort of a scientific consensus, I would say, that has been emerging over the past several years. It certainly is reflected in the administration's priorities for legislation, regulation, and incentives. So what's happening in Georgia? Well, in 2018, just a year or so into the Drawdown Georgia project, we did our own modeling. We do a computable general equilibrium model of the US, and we downscale it to estimate what is happening in Georgia. And at the time, in 2018, the forecast was that the emissions from the electricity sector would be relatively straight line over the next 10 or so years, out to 2030, not much of a change. Some swapping out of some coal, but a whole lot more natural gas coming in, so no net gain. Well, the world has changed with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. The forecast is significantly more optimistic. Now, this is, again, our own forecast. This is the National Energy Modeling Systems reference case that was done before all this new legislation. And then the bottom forecast is what we've added, modeling the incentives that are now in place to promote renewable energy and energy efficiency, which takes the electricity sector down considerably in the state of Georgia. So very promising. Still, though, more is needed. And also, most of these gains are from utility scale investments. It's from the construction of new solar farms, not new solar systems on our houses and our buildings. It's from investments at the large scale and not from what we're doing in the response from households. So looking at the state of Georgia and what's happening here, it's interesting to note that there's considerable evidence that we in Georgia and in the Southeast in particular have a vulnerability to climate that is possibly one of the most vulnerable regions in the country. And that's documented in this publication a couple of years ago, where we worked with a couple of climatologists and looked at the vulnerability from, heat and hurricanes and coastal issues. But at the same time, I'm going to talk about how Georgia's consumers are slow to respond. And so why is there this conundrum, this disconnect? Good news, we do have companies in the state of Georgia that are investing in producing clean tech products, right? Electric cars and rooftop systems, solar panels and batteries are being recycled and produced. Our universities are going strong on climate, as they are here in Georgia, Georgia Tech, UGA, Emory. We're all behind climate solutions, and climate solutions are available, right? So what is the problem? In the Drawdown Georgia project, we identified 20 of the highest potential solutions available to the state. That was work done a couple of years ago, and you can read more about it in the National Academy's paper that's cited here. You'll see among the 20 that span the 5 major sectors of the economy, 3 of them are electrification solutions that households can adopt. So we're looking at these 3 solutions today. That is the electric vehicle option, the use of heat pumps and high efficiency HVAC systems in building retrofits, and rooftop solar. So why these 3? Well, collectively, they could make a very big difference in Georgia. This is a state that's perfect for each of those 3. Also, the life cycle of energy savings that you get from each of those 3 are quickly paid back by the incremental cost required to purchase them. And they are somewhat similar big ticket items. Each of them has an upfront cost of something like $7,000, payback of something like 4 or 5 years. So they make for a very good comparison in research, right, for research design purposes. So why do I keep saying that Georgia's behind and Georgia's falling short? We're slow in adopting. So let's start by just looking at a couple of other places and what other states are doing. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I really want to move to what's happening in the household sector here in Georgia. But I took an example of a city for each of these electrification technologies, and for electric vehicles, I chose LA. Actually, I could have maybe should have chosen San Francisco. LA right now, it's the new EV car sales are about 12% of all new car sales. And in San Francisco, it's more like 18%. So I should have gone there. But the policies in LA are significant. For instance, you can see the state rebates there and the utility rebates. They have the toll and carpool lanes. They've got chargers. They've got streamlined permitting processes and EV-ready building codes. We don't have much of that here. Now, looking at rooftop solar, Hawaii and Honolulu is the place to go. Hawaii has an average of 22% of their households with solar, and Honolulu has 19.5%. They, yes, have very high electricity prices, but they have managed to roll out a lot of solar. I like this comparison because while Hawaii is at 20%, Georgia is at 0.2%. big, what a difference a couple of digits make. Right. So what have they done? Well, a lot of incentives again, and state requirements, performance mandates, and a lot of help. For heat pumps, it was kind of hard to find the front runner because heat pumps are really a great solution for the Southeast and not all that, at least historically, great a solution for a northern climate. Nonetheless, the new heat pumps are penetrating and will penetrate in the north because they are better. They are now able to tackle cold temperatures in ways that they're Canadian ready now. So let's look at New York City and what it's done with energy efficiency. They have one of the strongest building codes for efficiency. Every building that's over 25,000 in square feet, beginning in 2024, has got to have no more than 0.01 tons per CO2 per square foot upon construction or major renovation. I sort of went through some calculations and tried to think about what that meant for me and you. Say you have 500 square feet, that would be about 5 million tons of CO2 for the year. You and I in Georgia now are responsible for about 10. So you're going to be constrained under this type of a carbon threshold. Also, no fossil fuel hookups in new construction and major renovations by 2030. So there's not going to be competition between heat pumps, electric heating and cooling, and gas or propane or fuel oil, right? So a new day, once those fuel hookup requirements come into play. Oh, I had wanted to have a little map here, but my graphic artist didn't respond to my request yesterday. So I sort of imagine this is a map, right? Georgia's in the middle. Georgia has 27% heat pumps. Thank you, Ollie, for getting me these numbers. North Carolina has 38, Tennessee has 35, Alabama 39, Florida 31, and South Carolina 41. So we might boast the US average is 13%, and hey, we've got 27, but look what our neighbors are doing, and we ought to have much more than that. Natural gas plays a much bigger role in our home heating than in these other adjacent states for a number of reasons that have to do with the nature of the utilities that serve us and their investment in natural gas, their ownership.
That explains the difference in the heat pumps.
Why we have so little? Exactly what I was saying. Which is Southern Company's ownership of natural gas. Yeah. Why, for instance, the Tennessee Valley, the TVA only sells electricity and it pushes heat pumps. And it's done a good job. And that's true in Florida, South Carolina, et cetera. Yeah. So, what is it about the households that might be making a difference? We talk in policy and in looking at markets about policy push and market pull, right? So, okay, maybe the policies aren't pushing, but we also don't seem to have the pull from the marketplace. So we did a survey of 1,800 households, and I designed this with Corey Struthers, who's a great survey designer and analyst from UGA. Dynata fielded it, and it was done online. So the 1,800 respondents were divided into 3 tracks, and each of them answered deep questions about EVs, heat pumps, and rooftop solar, and a whole bunch of other questions about everything else in their life, to be able to contextualize what they were doing in general. We did undersample Black households and we oversampled women, so we have had to do statistical adjustments as we look at the data. To design a survey, we turned to the most cited theories in the field of household energy. And based on bibliometric analysis and my reading and contributions to this literature, the two top theories are the theory of the diffusion of innovation and the theory of planned behavior. So in the theory of diffusion of innovation, Rogers and Shoemaker talk about the attributes of adopters that differ by stage. So here in Georgia, we're still really needing to talk to the innovators because that's where we are. We're still in the first couple percentage or not very far along in the penetration of these technologies. So it's nice to know what these typically look like, the risk tolerance they have, the knowledge, the affluence that they bring to their decision making. And also the theory of diffusion of innovation talks about how attributes of innovations are important. That is, the speed of adoption is faster if there's a strong relative advantage, if it's observable, if it's less complex, if it can be incrementally adopted, a whole array of attributes of innovations that they've helped to explain the adoption process. The theory of planned behavior, Isaac and Fishbein's theory, talks specifically about the social psychology of individuals, their beliefs, what they think about an innovation, what attributes do they think it has? Is it expensive? Is it attractive? Is it useful? And the values that they put on expense and attraction and utility or whatever else. And then there's some formulas that they use. They also add to that an understanding of who influences these people. So there they look at social norms, and in particular, the identification of key reference that individuals use. Who do you copy? That's the theory number one in economics, copying, right? I've heard someone say that, an economist say that. Okay, so to that we add our own insights. And that comes from a lot of work I've done on the notion of constraints and policies. That is, a household or an individual may be ready to innovate and may have all the right attitudes and social norms, but something may be in the way, like they don't live anywhere near a charging station, right? So you have to take that into account as well. So while we look at these three innovations, these three electrification technologies individually, we really are wanting to push the concept of packaging because we can't afford to incrementally adopt one technology at a time. That's not the speed and scale that's required. We need to consider how they work together and how the synergies of co-adoption of these technologies make them more affordable and advance more quickly. So our questions are the following. How willing are households to adopt each solution? That's the Applied Energy article just published this month that we'll focus a lot on. What motivates households to adopt one and only one of them? And what inspires them to adopt all three, or perhaps two of them? So that's the forthcoming paper that we have out under review. And in other research, we also want to know things like how can smart carbon or climate smart lifestyles be promoted more generally? That's the work of Joe Bozeman on environmentally friendly lifestyles, climate smart ways of living. So that you'll see in our results here, that plays such an important role. And we think that it is a way of preventing rebounding. There's a bias that's called the one solution bias, I guess what it's called. That is, as soon as someone's made a big investment, they say, tick that off, and now I can spend the rest on my vacation or whatever, my new clothes. So we don't want that, and by that, in order to prevent that, you need to talk about lifestyles. We have a model here that we've used to do our analysis of willingness to pay. We call it the Heckman model, named after Heckman, who said, you can talk about many decisions as having two parts to them. One is the decision to proceed. You think this is a choice you're interested in. And then there's the decision of, well, but then how much would I be willing to pay, or how rapidly does the payback have to occur? So there's a yes, no, which is the first along the top there. And then there's a, well, how much am I willing, and will policy make a difference? So that's how we organized our survey. So we're thinking about two steps, focusing the first one. In order to use the Heckman model, you do have to have some variables that are not identical in one model from the other. There has to be some independence. So we do have that. We focus in step one on all the constraints. We figure that's where the constraints are at play. It's mostly, can I, can't I type decisions, as well as other things. And then in step two, we look at, well, how much are you willing to pay, which is focused on a whole array of other variables consistent with the theories that I mentioned. While I'm talking about the Heckman model and our analysis of it, we did do in our look at multiple adoptions, multinomial logistic regression, but I'm not going to talk about that. And I'm not going to talk about this model, but I just wanted to show it because it's very pretty. And here is a better way to talk through it. So I'm going to talk through it by first looking at step one, who is willing to pay? Who would consider? So here are the results. The coefficients that are positive are consistent with a greater willingness to pay, and those that are negative are the opposite. So you can see as you look down the negative side of this table that you have things like, I don't have a sustainable lifestyle. I don't have knowledge about these technologies. I'm not concerned about the climate. I'm an independent, or I'm a Republican. Some other interesting things like I'm poor, I'm rural. So you can walk through those on your own, but they're lined up according to the technology, and you see some of the results are common to all three of them. So for instance, some of the common reasons for not being willing have to do with infrastructure. We don't have charging stations nearby. My commute is too short to justify buying an EV car. I mean, you won't save on the fuel if you're not driving a lot. Households with gas heat or with propane are less likely to buy heat pumps or rooftop solar, because you can't meet your heating needs if you've got a fossil system.
So one of the things that I've found in similar analyses that often tends to matter is the size of the consumption that they currently have before adoption. So you'll find that really big consumers end up being the ones who adopt, and if they're like selecting on their potential for savings. Is that okay? Is that going to be on one of the
Well, we do have the bill.
The bill, okay.
The bill does not operate in the way you might expect it, because now we're looking at step two, and in step two, the willingness, the required return on investment that you need is greater if you're on the left side of this axis. And so higher bills, they're not significant anyway. Your current energy bill is not a significant predictor because it spans the origin here, right? That is, the confidence intervals do. So because of that, I can't say it's the opposite. It's just not significant, right? But things that are significant, and as before, thanks for bringing that up, Bill. And I think that's unexpected. Would have expected higher bills. The affluent individuals had natural gas. These were gas and electric bills. So we could maybe do a bit more. We could take them in parts and see, yeah. I did want to mention, though, low-income constrained solar. So you see we've got low income here and solar's in purple. So it, maybe I shouldn't say it constrains it because it kind of crosses that line a little bit. But what we have as common sociodemographics are sustainable lifestyle, belief in climate urgency, knowledge of the technology, and not being a Republican. You'll see this coming up a few times here. So for how much would you pay, what would you need to get back your return on investment to trigger adoption? So we see younger, higher income, belief in climate urgency, risk-taking, being a Democrat, or not being independent or not being Republican, and sustainable lifestyles come up again. So these are kind of common characteristics that we'll be talking about in a minute when I try to bring this to a summary. So we also asked people, why did you buy a rooftop solar system, EV, or heat pump? And we found it quite interesting that if you look at the role of, I wanted to save money, I want to save the environment. For EVs, there's some of both. For solar, very much driven by environmental desires and less so by savings. But for heat pumps, much more so for savings, economic drivers, than for environment. There's a pretty strong literature that suggests that in all of these fields of consumption, green signaling is very important. It makes a big difference if you get that social capital lift from your investment, like I can show off my solar rooftop and I can show off my EV, but you can't show off your heat pump very well unless you drag people into your house. And that's hard.
No yard signs yet?
No yard signs. Well, no, that's a good idea.
Did you vary the increase according to income groups? I would be curious to see what the different motivations would be.
Well, income is an extremely important variable.
Yes.
Yeah, and you'll see in my summary where it comes in. We didn't vary the amount that we estimated for each of the three was a $7,000 increase. And then we talked about how quickly you get that $7,000 back. And it was the same amount regardless of your income.
Yeah, no, I think my question is the motivation, right? As you here define the motivators, I could imagine that depending on which social economic group we're looking at, the motivation might be slightly different. The one might be more for prestige, the other one is much more economic driven, maybe.
I'll get back to you on that. I've done a lot of looking at that, and I was very surprised. I think it's a myth.
Interesting.
I think it's a big myth because we found a lot of support for greenness in the low-income strata and also among minorities. No difference, and I know for the minority issue, for African Americans versus other.
Interesting.
But they may not have the ability, right? Yeah. Okay. That could be looked at some more probably, but that's an important myth, I think, is what I think it's a myth.
Well, but it would be great to debunk it.
It would be nice to debunk
You
it,
had
that's right.
income in your previous model. I did notice that you had income there. And I think if you do some sort of, cross-validated model, then you might be able to get at.
We've done a lot of work on that income variable, and it is important for solar, for instance, in adoption, and not for the other two, but in preferences and reasonings, it's not different. Barriers to adoption. So we could look at, do people of varying incomes think something's more or less expensive? We could look at that as well. But yeah, expense and uncertainty are two dominant attributes across the board. But also there are constraints and barriers, like my HOA organization won't let me. There's no policy support. Actually, one of the variables there was, I'm waiting for policy support, which means policy can actually work against you if it's not in place, but people think it might become reality, right? Could lead to delay. I won't spend much time on these great maps. You can enjoy looking at them. This is where we have charging, and this is where we have solar, and this is where we have heat pumps versus gas.
Did you happen, and I have a paper that's like a lot like this on a different topic, and I hate it when people ask this, but did you happen to ask what people thought the adoption cost was?
No.
Okay. So I'm wondering, it would be interesting to see what the misperception would be by different socioeconomic.
Yeah, that would be a good question. I don't think we have anything like that, unfortunately, because we were.
Repeat the survey.
Yeah, we were really pleased to be able to take 7,000 and then say you could maybe get it all back in 2 years, 3 years, or 7 years. And so we just didn't. When you do willingness to pay, typically you ask, how much are you willing to pay? 1,000, I'll pay 1,000, 2, 3. Well, we're treating this as energy savings investments. So we thought it was best to treat it that way. And that's one of our novel contributions. All right, so just one more slide, I think, and then I turn to some conclusions. Policy, we found, was more influential in heat pumps. When people were asked, would you adopt with policy, they changed their mind more often with heat pumps than solar or electric vehicles. So this boost of policy was an interesting theme that we've been exploring. But I wanted to turn to the conclusions now. The conclusions are, they expand this research I've reported on and the other paper and some other work we've done. So I guess first and foremost, the role of infrastructure constraints and policy, critical. They can't be ignored. The income effect is very strong for rooftop solar, not so much for the adoption of EVs and heat pumps, but really important for co-adoption. So will people go beyond solar or beyond an EV, get a couple of these things? Well, maybe if they're wealthy, right? Clearly, we need inclusive financing and financial assistance to make this a more a stronger transition. The most consistently significant predictors of being unwilling to pay are limited knowledge about the technology. I don't know anything about an electric vehicle. I don't have any idea where I'd go to charge it up. Being Republican, not engaging in a sustainable lifestyle, and having no climate concerns. So really there were important social psychological issues that came through. We are intending, I've done a lot of analysis of the partisan divide Ollie, I've got a great PowerPoint presentation, but nobody to work with to write this up, because while I do have a degree, undergraduate degree in political science, I have not kept up in that field. And I know that there's a lot more to it than there used to be. So anyone knows of a collaborator, would love to work with them, tee them up this data. We know that that solar is much less popular by Republicans than EVs, which is interesting. Again, it's not so much the social capital gain from solar as maybe the social capital loss from solar by Republicans. So having a sustainable lifestyle, a really important fundamental finding in our work, that if you're doing all these other things, you're recycling and you're eating less meat and you're composting and a whole list, doing more they do of that, the more they co-adopt. And we think the more we'll be able to be able to promote positive spillover and prevent the one solution myth. Green signaling, I mentioned that that's important. High levels of strange things going on with information and education, which is a topic of another paper that we're writing. We found that generic energy information, we gave them all a test. We had a series of questions, and then we created a scale, and we found that their behavior in terms of adopting these technologies did not track their understanding of energy in the world, which was very interesting. And it didn't affect, it also was not impacted by their formal education, the number of degrees they had. That was so shocking. So we know we need to get more familiar with the knowledge, the role of knowledge. They need to know about what it is you're asking them to adopt in order to get them to adopt. But apparently they don't need to have a civil engineering degree or know a lot about where the US is importing its oil from or anything else like that, right? So we did do an analysis of our standard errors and found there was some spatial clustering. If you look at the counties that are in SMAs or micro SMAs or rural counties, there's a significant clustering. We haven't looked further at that. We incorporate that into the modeling to account for it, but probably worth some more look is to do with the markets, the policies, the social community issues, infrastructure, and worth studying. And finally, research covering other geographies is really important because the socioeconomic, technical systems are all very idiosyncratic, and there are many place-based unusual attributes that might make the Georgia study different from a study of, say, the state of Arizona, for instance. So, would love to see this replicated elsewhere in order to determine if these really are common conclusions or not. And so thank you so much for listening. And I'm just going to pause here to be sure you all know we have some research grants to give. And I'll just leave that there while you tell me what you think about our conclusions. Thank you.
A few minutes for questions.
I thought you made an interesting point at the end about the spatial clustering of counties. I grew up in rural South Georgia, so I can imagine that the perception of these technologies, I don't have to imagine, I know the perception of these technologies is very different. And I was curious if the percentages that you included in the beginning of kind of where Georgia stands compared to other states, if you know the breakdown of what part of that percentage Atlanta is contributing versus the rest of the state of Georgia. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, we're developing a solutions tracker that will give us some of those insights. We know to some extent we have some of the innovations tracked, solar and heat pumps and EVs. But we have 20 solutions we need to look at. And you can see this list here. You see this RFP here? Climate Solutions Tracker. We really want to know what is rural Georgia doing, as we don't have any idea. To be guessing.
Erin, I have two questions. One was you had this map where you showed 80% of energy consumption, and you compared that with heat pump usage. Could we maybe go back to that slide? Because I didn't understand how they correlate or not correlate, because they were almost oppositional, where Atlanta was in one, was 30%.
This one here?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah,
maybe
this takes some
maybe
explanation.
that's where you're hinting at, because I tried to understand
Okay.
that slide. So
Yeah,
maybe
this
we
needs,
get a little bit closer to that.
this needs to be, I think we need to flip the color scheme on the right side. This is actually Ollie's, from Ollie's work. So we looked at, on the right, where is the most electric home heating, because that would be where heat pumps would be most useful, easy drop in. So you see all rural Georgia and the south and some parts of the North Georgia mountains. You go to the left and you see.
It's a
Yeah,
potential, it's high
it's-
potential for heat pump use.
I
So it's not
consider
where
that.
it is currently, right?
That's right. On the
Okay, so
left,
potential. Okay,
is
got it.
where there's higher use of electricity for heating, and you tend to see higher use of heat pumps. And if there's higher natural gas, it's lower. So
Yeah.
Atlanta has a lot of natural gas for home heating, so that's actually the region that has the lowest penetration of heat pumps.
Yeah.
So it's trying to sort of show that correlation between.
I think we should show the one on the left in green. That's what we want. We want more heat pumps. And the one on the right, flip those, or keep that. So you can see the green is where the next wave of heat pumps will come from, unless we can tackle the growth of gas heat. So, yeah.
Yes, because I didn't understand it was a potential map. Frankly, it was a projection. I rather thought it was somewhat state of where we are.
Well, this is where we are.
Yeah, okay.
And this is where we might be
And maybe a related
in the
question.
future.
Out of my personal experience being in Boston, so I tried to put myself a heat pump into a building, and my challenge was not unwillingness, being not informed or any of that. It was rather that it wasn't available. So, and I was wondering, because I didn't see availability as being a topic in your request. So essentially, the industry is not ready for me to have off the shelf a heat pump system that would be able to tell me
What kind of a building?
Two-family,
Yeah, you're wrong.
1960.
You're wrong. I had mine installed at the Cape in December.
Yeah,
They're
that's
all
what
over it. They're all over it.
And so what I tried in Boston, it was not.
No,
possible.
No, there are state subsidies. There's a $10,000 rebate you can get with a heat pump, and they're all over it. Unless maybe in Boston, people are responding and there's too much pent up demand.
And so whoever I interviewed was incapable. So in my case, it was literally not me, not wanting or not.
I can give you a list of
Interesting.
30 or 40 companies that'll deliver a heat pump in Massachusetts.
Yeah, the question was here then yesterday as we had the discussion, is here the market already ready to be?
The marketplace in Georgia is not ready.
It's not ready, okay.
Yeah, the marketplace in Massachusetts is primed. You should, if you still have that house.
Okay, please
Go.
give me the list. of-
Okay, all right.
I'm ready.
Marilyn, we have a couple of questions online that we want to get to. Henry, if you want to unmute and hopefully.
Sure. I'm just aware that there have been solarized Decatur, solarized Forsyth, solarized Atlanta campaigns. I didn't know if those might have affected the spatial clustering you've noticed.
Absolutely. When you look at the solar map, you can see where the solarized programs have been. Yeah. It's a very, we've done some analysis of that. It's a definitive fingerprint.
And one more online.
Right, so that's,
Go ahead, Henry. You have a follow-up?
That's kind of
I was
along, that's along the same lines as Inga's question. You know, is it ready? Is the market ready? In those places, yes, but in
Yeah.
other places,
but
no.
that sounds like a good thing that more people could support and say, yeah, let's get solarized in Rockdale County again, or, you know, et
Yeah.
cetera. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Presentation.
And Jill, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Actually, we have a Gwinnett Solarized campaign live now, and we're RFPing. So if anyone wants to get rooftop solar in Gwinnett, please let me know. And so my question was,
That's great, Bill. Thanks for sharing that.
yeah, and nonprofits can also get a direct pay for solar. We're really excited to roll out the campaign. I had a question for your survey. Can you speak more on what data is needed for BIPOC communities to adopt solar, EVs, heat pumps? I think we would love to put together an electrification plan for the building owners or customers who we touch through Solarize. So I was just wondering if there was a way that we could, use your findings to make our Solarize campaign more equitable.
I'll have to get back to you on that. My ideas on the BIPOC community approach, implications of this survey. Yeah, let me just put that aside for the minute, Jill. I know how to get to you, so we'll talk later, okay?
I had one question in the back, and then we'll go to Shubro, and Iona Maria, you'll have the last question. Yeah, please.
Fantastic presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
I had a quick question with regards to, like, how do you structure your surveys to incorporate certain dynamic features in other countries? So, for example, in Germany, I read about that there are people who participate in that as a situation where they come from a high social income and they're dynamically engaged into the microgrid and making lots of money from it and so on and so forth. And it's somehow contributed into like the price of electricity falling and using noise. Meaning, like, it seems like there are other factors to get engagement from the masses that might not be incorporated. Like, for example, I witnessed cryptocurrency and people engaged in that. You could go through all the reasons of why it's a bad investment, but as soon as they saw the price jump, they were right back there and got engaged into the market. So it seems that incorporating those things, even though you can't really say it, I was curious, how do you incorporate that level of engagement? I guess
well, I don't know, but it's my vision that we will be there in this country in about a decade, that we may have peer-to-peer transactional electricity going on. We don't have it now. England has some places in Europe, not in Germany, to my knowledge. Germany is very behind in its smart meter uptake, and it's partly because they're afraid of confidentiality of data being breached. So they're not a leader in that. It's surprising, but England and the Scandinavian countries are. So I'm hoping that one day. One day. Okay. There we go. Okay, here's my conspicuous consumption New Yorker cartoon right from a while ago. Okay, you know how it is. First, you buy a big house, the big screen TV, and then you upsize everything to match, right? And you just keep going on and on and on. So here's my response. Why don't we compete for carbon neutrality, right? First, I bought a 100-year-old house, and now I'm competing to make it carbon neutral. And those are the things that I want to do. And I want to tell my neighbors, and when they're all out of power, they can come in and they can charge. They can charge their cell phone. I can't, unfortunately, charge them for what I give to them because of the Georgia Territorial Act. But one day, that act will be overturned or modified. So I'm hopeful.
Sure, thanks. Well, this is very provocative. Enjoy your presentation as always. So I have two questions. One is about the planning implications, and the second one is about scalability. So firstly, I'm kind of wondering, so what is to be done now that you've done the surveys and you've done the analysis? So what should we do to achieve your vision? I mean, should we give more incentives? Should there be more regulations? Should we educate people more? I mean, can you say something about how we should reach that goal? In what ways?
It's all about politics.
We should have more Democrats.
It's about the legislature and it's about the state capitol, the governor's office. For instance, if the governor does not sign a letter of intent to prepare a climate action plan, the state of Georgia will no longer be eligible to receive billions of dollars from the federal government from this new legislation. Nobody's talking about that. But those are the sorts of things. We really need a plan. The governor's got to have a plan. The legislature's got to require it. Henry, you probably know all about this, don't you? I bet you're working it.
A little bit. I heard a speaker from GIFA, the Georgia Money Agency Authority, and he said turning down money like this is rare, and it can happen. He's aware of one state where they turned down weatherization assistance money, but from everything his office has heard, they will be going forward. And I assume, I did not ask him specifically about the climate plan for the state, but I would assume that they're aware of that requirement and have talked to the governor's office about that, and that it's likely to be going forward. But if somebody wants a template of a letter to send, I can do that courtesy of Citizens Copy. I'll send you a link. Put it in the chat.
Oh, all right, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
That's so cool.
All right, well, last
Well, I have
question.
a second question, second part of that question.
Can I ask you to, let's let Iona Maria, and then you can ask after we break.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just a question for the conclusions. I think your last, or one of the last slides was about whether if there was policy, if they would pay for any of these. And I think that the higher percent was on heat pumps. So if there was a policy on heat pumps, they were willing to pay for that. If I remember correctly.
That's right. If they were given
compared to the other two.
Yeah, I mean, it was not a perfect experiment because the policy that we talked about was on-bill financing of a heat pump compared to a rebate. I'm not quite sure why we did that. We didn't know that heat pump rebates were on their way. We thought, what might happen? And we said on-bill financing. But anyway, that on-bill financing was very, very attractive to households.
So the reason for that, the possible explanation would be, for example, that this might improve their knowledge on that, and if there was policies on that.
Yeah.
So that's why it was the highest. Compared to the other.
Has to do with knowledge, you think?
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you think about that?
I don't know, but we do have the paper on knowledge being worked because we are so confused about knowledge and formal education and not passing the energy test, but then you know a lot about things. So I don't know. We're going to look into that. But thank you. It was a good question.
Well, thank you all very much. Gil, I see your hand is up, but unfortunately we're out of time. But I think you know Georgia Tech well enough that you know how to get a question here, and we'll certainly route it to Marilyn if needed, or if you want to go ahead and type it in, we'll let you maybe perhaps let her respond. And then any of y'all that would like to hang around for a little bit, if you have a few minutes to answer some additional questions. Yeah.
So I can ask my second question?